The Shadow Guests by Joan Aiken. 3. Little Con. Stepping out of the rolls into Woodstock Road on Monday morning, Cosmo found it hard to take school very seriously. He had done all his homework, written a pretty good piece on Roman Britain, actually. Apart from that, the weekend had been a million light years removed from school. Despite Eunice's amazing revelations and the shadow of the family curse, the 2 days had been full of good activities. Mr. Marvel had taught Cosmo how to use the harrow, and he had been introduced to the foals of Blossom and Duchess, and allowed to choose names for them. He had chosen Juno and Punch. Mr. Marvel had also found him some steel pittons, and he had started the long, tough job of hammering them into the walnut tree to make a spiral stair. So far he had put in 3. It was not a job you could work at for very long at a stretch. And he had begun to make camp on the island among the elder trees, which had grown up into a forest, and had helped Cousin Eunice lay a paved path with big slabs of Oxfordshire stone along by the yew hedge. On Sunday, he had written a long letter to his father, whom he wanted to talk to very badly indeed, though it certainly was going to be strange meeting him again with all this stuff about the curse between them. Poor Dad, Cosmo thought. He must feel terribly lonely over there, waiting for the man to come and take over his practice, waiting for news that won't come. Mark and Ma were always the ones who were close together. Now I understand why Father used to look so sad and left out sometimes. I wonder if I shall ever feel like that. Does it make it easier, knowing that something is bound to happen, or does it make it worse? Occupied with these ideas, he walked into school, and the atmosphere suddenly hit him like a bucketful of salt water in the face. For a start, it seemed that all of a sudden, everybody in his form hated him. "Oh, cripes, look who's here," Charlie groaned as he walked into the remove room. "Uh-oh," said somebody else. "The boy wonder is with us again. Our hero of the kangaroos." Cosmo pretended he hadn't heard these remarks and dumped his homework exercise books on the piles laid out to be collected. But as the day wore on, he could not pretend to ignore the hostility anymore. It was too open. People continually made sour or sharp remarks, obviously aimed at him. Everything he said was greeted with acid comment or withering silence. People ostentatiously moved away from him, as if he were contagious. "What the dickens is all this?" he was finally provoked into saying. "What's the matter? Have I got the plague or something?" "No," said Charlie coldly. "We have decided that you are disgustingly stuck up, and that as well as being a swank and a liar, you are a liar and a cheat. So we just don't want to have anything more to do with you than we absolutely have to. You're lucky, actually. Last year, when we were in 3rd preparatory, we'd probably have hung you upside down by your feet out of the window. But this year, we are halfway up the school, so we've decided to just send you to Coventry." "Gee, thanks." He was so angry. That was all he could say for a minute or two. Then, sickened at the sight of all their smug waiting faces, he burst out, "What in blazes do you mean? I'm a liar and a cheat. I am not." "You cheated at dodgeball. We all saw you." "I did not. Anyway, everybody cheats. I saw a lot of you cheating," he said, fatally weakening his case. "And you've told a whole lot of lies about Australia. For all we know, you've never even been there. In fact, nobody here believes a single word you say." "Too bad," he said coldly. "So we've decided we aren't going to speak to you anymore, except in lessons or when we absolutely have to." "I doubt I'll miss your charming conversation." "Good grief, how childish can you get?" he muttered. "And how long, might I ask, do you intend to keep that up?" Nobody answered. The day, thus badly begun, went on worse. He had done the wrong lot of math preps. "Just to show off," somebody whispered. And he got a black mark for that, and another for going across the garden in the rain without his raincoat. The lessons were a strain, since he knew that if he answered a question, somebody would be sure to murmur, "Swank, know all." And if he said he didn't know, the teachers would think he was a dumb fool. In between lessons, he had to endure all the pointed remarks aimed at him. Too bad there isn't room for you at this table, Meredith. It's pretty hard on you having to sit at a table with a pair of smelly dumbheads." It's going to be awkward when the autumn term comes and we have to split up for studies. Who'd want to share a study with him? Gabby will have to find a special room by himself. Even Bun wouldn't want to share with him, would you, Bun? No, said poor Bun, and gave Cosmo a nervous, propitiating look. The intermediate forms, Cosmo had already learned, to mark their advance into the upper school, were given the privilege of small cell-like studies, which were shared between 3 or 4 people. He had observed that months ahead, the social problem of who was going to share with whom was a matter of terrific importance, much discussion, and a lot of careful, anxious arrangement, since, once you were fixed up in a study with somebody, it was not easy to change, unless one of you left the school. So you might find yourself up at senior level, cumbered with some ninny who had seemed congenial when you were younger, or you might, in your haste to get yourself respectively paired off, not left out in the cold, snatch the first offer, and so miss the people you would really have liked to share with. Cosmo had already wondered, well, rather apprehensively, who his study mates were likely to be. Charlie and Molly would obviously share with each other. And probably with the other boy, Chris, who went round with them a good deal. Andy and Lot would probably join up with Rebecca. They seemed to like the big, cheerful German girl and all shared an interest in stamp collecting, of all boring things. Sheil, Tansy, and Meredith might go together. That left him the dismal prospect of sharing with Bun. But suppose even Bun wouldn't have him. He'll never find 3 friends to share with, Charlie remarked, as if listening to Cosmo's thought. I'm afraid old Cosmo Curtois will have to go up in the attic by himself. What a name to be saddled with, giggled Tansy. For such a giggly girl, she was very spiteful. As Cosmo had already discovered. Cosmo, it sounds like cough mixture. Cosmic Curtois. Hey, Comic, how do you like Morning Quest School? I thought you weren't supposed to be speaking to me, Cosmo said sourly. He looked at their hostile, mocking faces and hated the lot of them. Supercilious, freckled Charlie, sycophantic Molly, dull, self-satisfied Andy and Lot, dumb Rebecca, surly Chris, spiteful Tansy, stupid Bun, moody, cross-eyed Sheil, and cool, sarcastic Meredith. How, in heaven's name, was he going to put up with a week of this? A week, a month, a term? It went on, and it grew worse. During prayers, everybody in the form shuffled about, making it plain that they were trying to avoid standing next to Cosmo, until, sharply reprimanded by Mr. Cheevy, at meals his own form kept well away from him. In football, the boys refused to pass to him, even when he was well placed for a pass, although they were bawled out for this by Mr. Bredbury. And at other times, such as 11 o'clock break, when everybody was supposed to go out into the garden, he was left conspicuously alone and had to walk around by himself. He stuck his hands in his pockets, hunched his head between his shoulders, and tried to look as if he had a tremendous lot on his mind, maybe working out the theory of relativity. Well, he had a lot on his mind, damn it. Little did those dumb oafs know what problems he had to worry about. Anyway, that was one thing he would never tell them, for if he breathed a single word about his family curse, they would be certain to label it both outrageous swank and lying, to get attention, as if he wanted their horrible attention. As a matter of fact, compared with this sudden and disconcerting unpopularity, the thought of the Curtis curse was almost comfortable, and at least interesting. Certainly thinking about it took his mind off his present troubles, and he thought about it a great deal in the course of the week. There were all kinds of things he wanted to ask Eunice. For instance, had Father talked to her about it when they were young together at Curtis Place? Had she known about it then? What stage had Mark been told, as he obviously had, and why was Mark told when he, Cosmo, had been kept in the dark? Perhaps some new boys would come to the school in the autumn term, or girls, and he could share a study with them. Or perhaps Father would decide not to come to England after all and would summon Cosmo back to Australia. It would certainly be good to leave this hateful, spiteful school. But, as against that, he already felt rooted in at the mill house with Eunice and Mrs. Tidings. He really didn't want to leave it. If only he didn't have to go to school. Midway through the week, which went on just as badly as it had started, Mr. Gavatos sent for him again. "Poor old comic's going to cry his eyes out on Gabby's lap," whispered Tansy audibly to Rebecca, who laughed heartily. "Well, Cosmo, how's it going?" inquired Mr. Gavatos, with that sweet smile which crinkled up his eyes but didn't seem to get to the middle of them. "Feeling more settled, are you? Making friends, Mr. Cheevy seemed to think you were looking a little troubled. Any problems bothering you that I can help you sort out?" "Well, sir, I've just heard about this ancestral curse, and as well as that, my form has decided for no particular reason to send me to Coventry, and a nasty little white thing like an outsized tadpole fell out of my sleeve, and I haven't seen it since, and the thought of it keeps bothering me. I can't help wondering where it got to." "No, thank you, I'm quite all right," he said. "Sir." "It does take a while getting used to a new place," said Mr. Gavatos. "I dare say in a couple of months' time you'll look back and be quite amazed at how differently you feel about things." "Yes, sir," said Cosmo politely. "Not finding the work too hard, eh? Mr. Cheevy reports that you are well up to your age level. In fact, rather beyond it here and there. Still, I expect the others have plenty to teach you in different ways." "Yes, they do." Mr. Gavatos sighed. "Very well, Cosmo. Run along, then." Outside the door, he found the pale Meredith waiting her turn to see the headmaster. She at first had seemed a good deal more sensible than some of the others in the form, and on an impulse he said to her quietly, "I say, isn't this Coventry business a bit stupid?" She shrugged her shoulders and answered in a toneless little voice, "Everyone has to go through with it when they're new. We all did. It's supposed to help you find your level." And she went on to Mr. Gavatos's study. "Ah, Meredith," the headmaster said, much more warmly than he had to Cosmo. Then the door shut. After lunch, between 1:30 and 2, people were allowed, if they had any pocket money, to buy chocolate and sweets from a store presided over by silly Miss Gracie, the music mistress. In Australia, Cosmo had never eaten sweets, but now he had a sudden passionate craving for things that were chewy and gooey. Mars bars, crunchies, whipped cream walnuts. Eunice had given him £1 for pocket money, so he went up to Miss Gracie's cupboard after lunch and bought 3 Mars bars. "Getting some for your friends too, are you?" smiled Miss Gracie. Obviously, it hadn't occurred to her that a person could eat 3 Mars bars all by himself. Cosmo heard Chris murmur to Charlie in the line behind, "What a hope! He must be going to guzzle them all on his own. I don't suppose Cosmic Curtoys has a single friend in this hemisphere." "As a matter of fact, you couldn't be more wrong," remarked Cosmo coldly, surprising even himself. "I have 3 friends out at my cousin's place, which is why I don't give a rap whether any of you stuck-up lot speak to me or not. Just imagine he has 3 friends, and what might be the names of those lucky persons? Percy, Bert, and Oscar. Where had those names come from? They had flashed into his head like lightning, but they had the wrong effect on Chris and Charlie, who fell about laughing. "Percy, Bert, and Oscar! Oh, hold me up, someone! Percy the Penguin, Burlington Bertie, and the Colonel of the Nuts. Burlington Bertie, the Colonel of the Nuts, and Oscar. What about Cedric? What about little Lord Fauntleroy? Isn't he there?" Move along, please," said Miss Gracie, getting flustered. "You're holding up the line." Chris and Charlie followed Cosmo downstairs. "I suppose you and Percy and dear Bertie and Ozzy all play Ring of Roses with that nice lady who brings you in the rolls. Your aunt, is she?" "No, as a matter of fact, she's a vampire. She's Dracula's aunt." Chris and Charlie looked at one another solemnly. Oh, Wonderboy's getting up-ish." Cosmo left them abruptly and walked away toward the cloakrooms. As he went, he heard them reporting the exchange to Molly, and Molly's sudden engaging bubble of laughter. "I say, Dracula's aunt. That's rather good." Cosmo locked himself in the WC, intending to eat one of his Mars bars, but was confronted by a penciled notice on the wall that said, "Cosmo Curtoys, is a swanky ass. He suddenly felt sick and discovered that chocolate was the last thing he wanted. By Friday, when Eunice came to fetch him, he had still not eaten the Mars bars. The name Dracula's aunt had somehow stuck to her. People said it to each other. I say, do you know that Cosmo Curtis lives with Dracula's aunt? He has a nice basin of blood for breakfast every Saturday. This had gone the rounds of the lower forms, and by 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, quite a number of people were hanging about the front steps, interested to see the Rolls and its driver. Loft was in the car, too. He came in on Fridays. As Eunice spent only half a day in college, somebody murmured, "There's Dracula's dachshund." Eunice, who had come straight from a lecture and was still wearing her black gown, looked keenly at the assembled speakers and said, "Hello! Could someone tell Cosmo Curtis that I'm here for him, please?" At that moment, Cosmo himself came out the door with his duffel bag and got into the car. "Goodbye," Eunice said politely to the watchers on the threshold. A faint cheer of "Hip, hip, hooray!" went up as the Rolls crunched out of the gateway. "Were those friends or enemies?" Eunice asked. "Enemies." "Heavens, you certainly seem to have made plenty." She sounded quite calm about it. "What did you do, fight them all?" "No, it's just they just sort of appointed themselves." "Oh well, if it happened as unreasonably as that, they'll probably disappoint themselves equally fast. It's tough while it lasts, though. How's work going?" He started telling her, and she asked a number of questions about his science and maths, which made the journey home pass in a flash. Cosmo felt peculiarly nervous when he first went up to his bedroom. Try as he would, he couldn't get out of his mind the memory of that little whitish thing. In the course of the last weekend, he had hunted it very thoroughly several times and found nothing. But the room was old and cornery. In fact, it had a small square trapdoor in one corner that led straight into the roof. There were lots of places where the thing could have hidden itself. A cupboard that held a water tank and a huge wardrobe at the end of the room. "Are there rats here? Are there rats here?" he asked Eunice, who said, "Why, did you hear scurryings in the roof?" "Starlings, more likely, or mice. Lob wouldn't allow rats. He keeps the place clear of them, but he despises mice. They could sit on his feet and he wouldn't bother." Lob was very fond of chocolate, and Cosmo had the idea of enticing the old dog up to his room with crumbs of Mars bar, but the result was rather disconcerting. Lob stopped in the doorway, growling deep in his throat with the fur on his shoulders all ruffled up, and flatly refused to come inside. Then, ignoring offers of more bits of Mars, he turned round and hurried away down the wide, polished stairs with his toenails rattling and his tail between his legs. However, despite another very careful search, Cosmo could see nothing in the room. He decided to sit down and do his prep at once, get it over with. These days, the evenings were growing lighter. It would not be dark until 7. Eunice was outside the house mowing the lawn. He could see her each time she came across. Her pale hair was tied back with a handkerchief, and she wore an old pair of corduroys all stained with green. She was a reassuring sight. He opened the window and called, "Shall I help?" "Shall I help?" "Get your work done first. There's plenty of grass." He had laid the 3 Mars bars in a row on his bed. He intended to eat them at a rate of 1 a day over the weekend. The first, what was left of it, tonight after supper, while reading Flatland, an extraordinary book that Eunice had given him. The second, tomorrow, while doing farm work. Maybe Mr. Marvel would share it. And, if he got all his pittance hammered in, the third, up in the fork of the walnut tree on Sunday. With this plan in his mind, he settled down to work. Maths first, then a description of an experiment done to prove that potatoes contain starch, fairly elementary stuff, then an essay about the silk route. Quite interesting that was. He became really absorbed in it, only noticing with about an eighth of his attention how the sound of the mower became gradually louder as Eunice worked her way back and forth across the lawn, slowly coming closer to the house. At last he had finished and stood up, stretching his stiff writing fingers. 8 pages. Even sour-faced Cheevy ought to be satisfied with that. There was still a third of the lawn left to mow, he saw. He could go out now and take on from Eunice. He turned to leave the room and stood, still in shock. For as he moved, the draft from his movement, or perhaps from the open window, caused the 3 Mars bar wrappers to flutter from the bed to the floor. The wrappers were empty. The contents were gone. What was even more extraordinary, he found, as he picked them up, first looking sharply about the room and under the bed, was that the 2 unopened wrappers were still unopened, square and tidy, the ends neatly sealed, just as they had come from the factory. Only they were hollow. There was nothing inside, not a crumb of chocolate remained. Rather wildly, Cosmo began hunting about the room again, under the bed, in the cupboards, the wardrobe, his empty suitcases. Then, while he had his back half turned to the window, something caught his eye. A flash of movement, and he spun round, just too late to see exactly what it was that had scrambled over the sill. He bounded across the room and leaned out the window. There was a sloping roof down below, over a kind of garden room, running the length of the house, where tools and deck chairs were kept. This made a useful emergency exit from his room. He had already decided, since the drop from the edge of the roof to the ground was only about 7 feet. Now it seemed that something else had the same idea. Whatever it had been was already out of sight. Thinking that he might intercept it if he went the other way, Cosmo raced down the stairs and out the side door. He ran round the side of the house to where Eunice was still moving. "Do you want to take over now?" she said. "Yes, okay. Eunice, did you see anything come out of my window?" "What sort of thing?" He explained about the Mars bars, rather embarrassed by them, but she didn't say greedy pig or anything like that, only remarked, "It might have been a squirrel. They are terrible thieves, and they do get into the house sometimes. Emma lost a whole batch of quince jelly she'd left on the window sill to cool last year." Cosmo thought about the half glimpse he'd had of the escaping creature. No, he was sure it couldn't have been a squirrel. It was too big for a start, and too pale in color. Sallow, grayish-white. He couldn't help feeling sure that it was the thing that had come out of his sleeve. Only now it had grown. Unless it was another of the same kind, larger. This had been about the size of a cat or rabbit, as far as he could judge out of the corner of his eye, and there was something about its shape, tapering like a tadpole or fish, or like some rather beastly pictures that hung in the school dining room. Pink people like sardines gazing up at God by William Blake. They gave him the gooeys. All this went through his mind fast. He decided that he definitely could not tell Cousin Eunice any more about the white thing. It had been too disgusting. Anyway, whatever it was, it had left the house now. That, at least, was something to be thankful for, he thought, taking over the warm handles of the mower and beginning to guide it across the glossy grass. Should he have shut his window? But very likely, because of the drop from the edge of the roof to the ground, the thing wouldn't be able to climb back in again. You'd need to be pretty athletic to get up there. And it hadn't looked athletic, not at all, more like a horrible little embryo. He might have been able to tell her if the white thing hadn't somehow seemed like part of him, and a nasty, shambling part of that. Once he had found a sheep tick stuck in his groin, growing steadily faster as it sucked his blood. He had been so disgusted and ashamed that days went by before he could bring himself to tell Ma about it, not until he had failed to burn it off with Dad's cigarette lighter. "Has the house ever been haunted?" he asked in a careless manner at supper. "Are you thinking of a ghost might have made off with your chocolate?" said Eunice, laughing. "Haunted this house? Never," declared Mrs. Tidings with great firmness, "and I ought to know, for my Uncle Sid was the miller here when I was a scullery maid up at the place at age 12. No one's ever heard of a ghost here, not in the house. That's to say, of course there's the coach and 6 that drives past the gate at full moon, but that's never been known to stop anyway." "A coach and 6? Are you kidding?" "Certainly not," she was affronted. "I've seen it myself, time and time again, mostly when I took bad with the indigestion and had to get up at night for a bit of bicarb," with a sniff and a chuckle. 3 o'clock or thereabouts, it's supposed to pass by. Yes, I've seen it plain enough. It goes along where the old road used to run by the side of the meadow, and then round the edge of the wood. You can see it easy from my upstairs window. Have you seen it, Cousin Eunice?" Eunice answered vaguely and exasperatingly that she thought she had, but couldn't be positive. "It's one of those muddy memories. You don't know if you really saw something or only intended to. Your father and I always meant to get up at 2:30 and come down here from the place to watch it. To watch for it, only now I'm not certain whether we ever did or not. The tale of the coach and six somehow cheered Cosmo very much. That was a proper kind of ghost to have. He could hardly withhold a grin as he wondered how his enemies in Remove would react to that if he told them about it. More lying, they would label it. Doubtless more swank and romancing. He certainly intended to try to see the coach himself. Full moon wasn't for several weeks. There had just been one. He resolved not to miss the next opportunity. And somehow, oddly, the thought of the phantom coach made the other thing easier to take. But still he hoped very much they would not come back. It was welcome to his Mars bars. On Saturday, Mr. Marvel showed Cosmo how to run the electric milker. He was made to take a lot of stringent precautions before being allowed into the milking shed, wading in his Wellingtons through a trough of disinfectant, putting on clean coveralls. "Against bovine tuberculosis, that is," said Mr. Marvel, who was very sold on hygiene, and washing his hands and arms most thoroughly before putting on rubber gloves. But it was worth the trouble, for the little Channel Island cows were so charming. Cherry, Mary, Carrie, Berry, Perry, and Sherry, with their silky mouse-colored coats and great black-ringed eyes and elegant scooped-out faces. They all had to be shampooed before milking and were so clean and sleek that he felt they ought to come into the house and sit in a ring round the fire like Loeb. They were hardly bigger than the dog. It seemed amazing they could produce all that creamy milk. After milking, Cosmo worked on his island camp, making a palisade of elder branches round it, and cutting down a lot of nettles that were sprouting fast. He could not withstand the fidgety feeling while so occupied that someone was watching him. Every now and then he heard a rustle among the undergrowth, but whatever it was never came into view. An otter, perhaps? Then he hammered 6 more pittons into the walnut trunk. He was getting quite high by now, working round in a spiral, spacing them about 2'6" apart. It was a particularly hellish job. Mr. Marvel had kindly lent him a drill to start the holes, which was some help, but even so, the walnut trunk was formidably hard with grayish wrinkled bark, like the hide of a prehistoric hippopotamus. Being obliged to drill and then hammer, while precariously balanced on a low pitton, was very bad. If he used both hands to hold the pitton and to hammer, he unbalanced himself and fell off. He used only one hand and hung on with the other. Then the pitton tended to fall out and he had to climb down and fetch it, cursing. He had tried Eunice's fruit ladder, but it unfortunately wasn't high enough. His arms and legs ached like blazes. The muscles were being worked to death. 2 more pittons would be enough, he decided. Now he was almost within reach of the fork. Mr. Marvel passed by, on his way to inspect the water meadows for sogginess. He tested a couple of the lower pittons and said that Cosmo was making a greatly job of it. Greatly was his highest term of praise. Dusk was falling, and Cosmo had almost made up his mind to leave the final pitton for Sunday morning, when a little shrill whining voice from the foot of the tree caused him to start so violently that he dropped the last pitton with a clang. The voice called peevishly, "Let me up too. Con wants to come. Let me up, let me up. Who the devil are you, and where did you come from?" Cosmo croaked, when he had recovered his voice. Down at the foot of the tree was a horrible little boy, aged 4, 5 perhaps. Cosmo had never had anything to do with younger children, so he didn't know. Jiggling fretfully up and down, clutching the lowest pitton, which was just within his reach, and whining like a gnat. "Let me up. Not fair. Leave Con out. Connie come up too." Cosmo was immediately thankful he had deliberately placed the lowest pitton quite high up, so that only a long-legged, agile person could start the climb. This monstrous little imp couldn't make it, that was for sure. Could he be something to do with Mr. Marvel, a nephew, grandchild, friend's child? Mrs. Tidings came from the house with a basketful of tea-cloths to peg on the line, and Cosmo shouted to her, "Hey, where did this one come from?" Then he got another bad shock. for she replied, "What's that, dear?" and walked right past without appearing to notice the little monster wailing and hopping up and down. "Why, him, that beastly little brat." "Brat? What brat?" "That boy." There's no boy about, dear," she replied, and passed so close to the kid that she could have knocked him over with her basket. Cosmo came slowly down the trunk until he was on the bottom but one piton, where he stopped, taking a good look at the child. He saw a small, stocky boy, pudgy face, with short, dirty fair curls, a scowling, pugnacious expression, dressed in grubby, ragged clothes that were much too small for him. He resembled somebody. Who could it be? Brown goo was smeared around his mouth and over his cheeks. The reason for that flashed upon Cosmo at the same time. He had noticed something else odd about the kid's appearance. He flickered. He came and went like a faulty film, or the sound of a radio station isn't properly tuned. Although shaped so solidly, he quivered on the air as if printed on a screen that wasn't quite there. Cosmo had seen an exhibition of holographs once in Sydney, pictures written on the air with laser beams. They seemed quite real, three-dimensional, and yet they were just an effect of light. So with this little monster, and we'll pause there.